How did you get into agriculture farming in general? How'd you make that leap from Australia to Dubai?
Growing up, my dad works for an agricultural company, a family-owned company called Sundown Pastoral. So I was kind of lucky to be at least at like an arm's length to ag my like whole life growing up. And then as I got a bit older, sort of doing like odd jobs on the farms. And then while at university, I would spend the full summers working, doing cotton irrigation. So like starting siphons and things like that during, like to make money for university. So I always had like a connection to agriculture and I was always really interested by it. And finishing high school, I didn't really have any clue what I wanted to do, which I think is probably often the case. So I did a business, more business degree focused. And at the end of the 4 years, I had 2 degrees, one in business marketing and one in finance. And I'd worked like doing odd jobs for banks, like internships with a bank, did like digital marketing, things like that. And I did enjoy some of those, but I got very lucky. After graduating, I applied for the graduate program with John Deere, and I didn't get a graduate job, but they actually hired me straight away into an analyst position with them. And that was really like a dream come true, honestly. So it was kind of a perfect fit of having the skills from the university and then sort of the passion for agriculture. So was very fortunate to work for them for a number of years, more in like a business-minded role in terms of like pricing and incentives for the dealerships. So I'd have like some touch points with farmers, but mostly through the dealerships, understanding like their challenges and things. And then after about 3 years of doing that, I told them that I wanted to live abroad. And that was like a really key interest of mine. And that sort of has been a bit of a theme, I think, in my life. So they straight away offered me a position in New Zealand, and it was a field role. So really hands-on with the farmers, and it was really tech focused, like technology based. Not just about what John Deere had to offer currently, but looking into the future of what they could potentially deliver 5, 10, even like 25 years into the future for those farmers. So that was really sort of more my first introduction into like more technology in agriculture, at least to that degree. And during that time, on the side, I had dealt with some greenhouses, and I was beginning to get really interested in not just the technology, but also like sustainable agricultural practices and sort of looking into that, which sort of in turn fell into indoor agriculture, like shipping container farms, hydroponics in particular, and where that could lead. Then after spending some time in New Zealand, I just happened to go on a holiday to Vietnam. And at the end of that holiday, through a connection from the cotton farm that I used to work on, I went to a denim jean manufacturer in Vietnam, and they had a like incredible setup. Their big focus was like sustainability, and they had a really interesting manufacturing plant there. And after visiting, I had a discussion with the owner, and he was really passionate about sort of looking into agriculture in Vietnam. And I spoke to him and mentioned that, you know, like the greenhouses, indoor vertical farming, and he'd already actually purchased some shipping container farms that were actually currently being shipped to Vietnam at the time. And at the end of our conversation, he said, "Would you want to move to Vietnam and head up the business?" And so I basically had been home in New Zealand for about 2 days, and then I packed my bags and moved to Vietnam. So yeah, it was definitely a bit of a whirlwind, not somewhere I ever expected to live, but was an incredible experience. I ended up being in Vietnam for 4 years, and I spent a year building that company. We had 3 shipping container farms that were really state of the art, very automated system, could manage them from, you know, your mobile or laptop. And then at the back of that, because we were right beside the denim manufacturer, we actually built a 1 hectare greenhouse as well. So we basically grew like leafy greens and sort of more high-end crops in the indoor farm, and we did more like melons, cucumbers in the greenhouse. So yeah, that was a really interesting experience, and learned a lot during that time of how to manage sort of those farms and managing, I guess, like more diverse workforces where sometimes the language barrier was definitely a challenge. So yeah, it was incredible time, and then that kind of led into me leaving them and starting my own company in Vietnam. I'd spent a lot of time working with the agricultural university in Vietnam. They'd helped us with our project, and also that's where I was hiring all of my employees from. So they had given me, leased me for 2 years, a 2 hectare plot free of charge, with the condition that we would like work together on projects. So we were actually developing our own indoor shipping container farm. And then that's when COVID hit. So unfortunately, all the schools and universities were shut down for like almost a full 2 years. So everything went online, and that meant that like no one could visit the school. So that block of land unfortunately got sort of tucked away, and then I had to pivot a little bit and moved more into like consultations. I actually like rented a farm in like just outside of Ho Chi Minh City that was an aquaponics farm. So we would sell that produce into the city, and then also work with restaurants, a lot of schools, and do like talks on hydroponics and build some like basic or high tech setup for them so that they could grow their own produce, and sort of more B2C, focusing on like some products that like at home grow kits and things like that for people on their balconies and things like that. So yeah, it was a bit of a pivot and sort of change things, but it was nice. Like it sort of allowed me to work like very closely with a lot of restaurants, and in particularly like schools from more of an educational side, which was nice and has benefited me now, because we do work with a lot of schools in the past, and like with farm tours and things like that. So it's helped in that degree. And then towards the end of COVID, I basically applied for a job with Emirates in Dubai, not thinking too much of it. It ended up being probably close to a year worth of interviews. And then, yeah, basically within a week, packed up my bags and moved to the US for close to 2 months, just outside of Boston, where I was based with a company called Crop One, and they were the joint partner between Emirates Flight Catering, and Crop One was the sort of more of the technology, plant science backing. And so I got to spend a full basically 2 months with them, day in, day out, just working through the systems, processes, how they operate, learning sort of the background to why their system is the way it is, and how it was going to sort of be scaled for Emirates Crop One, which we ended up, was I think still is the largest indoor vertical farm in the world. So yeah, it was quite hard to fathom the scale, and even when moving to Dubai, took some time to sort of get used to it. But it was good, like learning at least how they had envisioned it to be replicated in the UAE. So it was very valuable having that time. And then moved exactly almost 3 years ago now, just over 3 years ago, to Dubai, and was part of the pre-construction and then basically everything to do with starting the farm. So all the purchasing of equipment, building SOPs, training manuals, hiring all the staff, and sort of getting it up and running. And then, yeah, doing the day-to-day operations, and did that for 2.5 years. And then most recently have changed roles basically at the beginning of this year, and now working as a general manager for a company called Tech Agro. And now our focus is a little bit more different than Bustanica, whereas we have greenhouses in the middle of the desert, and sort of we have like a big focus towards really year-round production of affordable, high-quality produce to people within the UAE, predominantly growing crops such as like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. So definitely like staple crops. But the big challenge and focus for us is becoming a supplier year-round, which traditionally isn't how it operates here. We're very reliant on importation. I think it's 85% or more of all the products in the UAE are imported. So
So when you think about farming for the future, I think that farming in the desert seems like kind of a key example of that. You mentioned earlier the controlled environment agriculture. Can you explain a little bit more about what that term means and how it kind of fits into that space of maybe a sustainable food system for the future?
Yeah, like obviously the first thing where we are here in the UAE, the biggest challenge or challenges we face are around like arable land. There's not soil here; it's predominantly sand. So there's a lack of arable land. The lack of water resources. There is some bore water and like underground water tables in certain areas, more predominantly in Abu Dhabi, as opposed to the Southern Emirates. But predominantly speaking, all the water in the UAE comes from desalination. So it's coming from the ocean and then being desalinated. And then that's distributed to either the farms or to us here at like the houses and so on. So that's obviously a key challenge that we face. It's lucky to rain a handful of days a year here. So that's obviously key. So that's a lot to do with like the hydroponics and conservation of water that we really focus on. And then the biggest challenge, generally speaking, is the temperature. So we see temperatures up to 52 to 54 degrees around that Celsius in the summer. So yeah, and even in the best of conditions, it's like that's really challenging depending on the technology that you have. So really, the traditional agriculture that you would see in this area sort of only runs between October, November through till sort of April, May. So traditionally, farms will grow for 7 months of the year and then they pack up shop and wait until the summer's over. So as a result of that, it's very heavily relied on importation. And recently the government here is investing a lot into food security. So they want to be a food security global leader by 2051. And that's an initiative that they've introduced. And as a result of that, there's a lot more farms sort of coming to the area that are sort of trying to tackle that problem, because we do have a large population and it's growing rapidly as well. So the things that we sort of had at the previous farm is it was a completely indoor operation. So it was 1 hectare footprint and it was 3 stories. So we had about 30,000 square meters of 3 hectares of actual growing area, which we utilized. And then the term vertical farming, it was 3 stories, but then also on each floor we have racking with 6 shelves. So in theory, you basically have 18 layers of growing area. So you're really trying to maximize that footprint of that area to maximize output. So that farm, our target was approximately 3 tons of leafy greens per day. So lettuce, spinach, kale, which is a significant volume from a single farm. And that was 365 days a year because we utilized like HVACs, air conditioning systems, which managed not just the temperature, but also the humidity within the grow rooms to optimize for the plants. And then we used LED grow lights for the actual photosynthesis of the plants as well. And then the farm that we had was predominantly manual. It wasn't an automated, like the harvesting and everything was manual. Because depending on if we wanted to alter the crops in the future, we wanted to keep it pretty fluid in that respect. But we did have an automated dosing system for the nutrient side of things. So that was all a liquid nutrient that we tailor-made to the crops at the specific growth stage. So was very like high in terms of plant health, plant like science, and a lot of research going into exactly the tailored sort of formula that we would use for those particular crops. And while we were there, we did start to play around with introducing new crops, things like microgreens, which has a huge market with like the chefs and restaurants. We'd introduced like edible flowers. So that was an interesting one as well. And we did a test with strawberries. So that was quite an interesting project. And I think something we'll probably see more of in the future, because for us here, like strawberries, we'll predominantly get them from the UK or throughout Europe, and unless it's in the peak season, and even during peak season, the strawberries here are really rubbish because they're harvested early. They have the white caps on the top, and they're not sweet. They taste more like an apple than than a strawberry. So it's a little bit of a sad thing. So that's something a lot of people are trying to tackle both in greenhouses and in indoor vertical farming as well. But most recently now with the greenhouses, so we have a lot more challenges than in the indoor farm, but we're trying to be as cost effective as possible, which is the key. Because I think for us, we want to be able to bring the product for at least to the majority of people that live within the UAE. So to tackle that, we do use greenhouses. They have fans. We have cooling pads with pumped with the cold water to try and reduce the temperature within the greenhouse themselves. And most recently, we've invested with a company called Second Sky. It's a company originally that started in Saudi Arabia, that developed it in Saudi Arabia, but basically is produced in Spain, and it's a slightly different colored polycarbonate. It looks, instead of the traditional, which is kind of like a yellow color, it's more of a blue. And the key for us from the research we've done with them, and what we will be the first farm, I think, to be utilizing it fully here, is that you can see about an 8 to 10 degree reduction in temperature in the peak of summer. So if it's 50 degrees outside, hopefully we can get it closer to sort of the mid to low 30s inside the greenhouse with all the tricks up our sleeve. So that previously wasn't really achievable with the existing basic polycarbonate. It does have a slightly increased cost than the traditional, but the benefit is it's not actually blocking out any of the PAR. So we're hoping that we still see good yield on the crops. And even in the winter time, one of the challenges here is that while the temperatures are much nicer, there's a lot less daylight. So you can't risk obviously losing any photosynthesis during that time. So we need to sort of maximize year round. We've also used some things. We don't use soil, obviously, in terms of the ground. At Bostanica, we're completely soilless operation. Here at the current farm now, Tech Agro, what we do is we actually currently we import some. It's like basically a volcanic soil from Jordan, and it lasts us a full 10 years, and it's recyclable. We can wash it and reuse it. And when it's activated, basically we do see a reduced temperature at the roots as well, which is really key, especially on those hot days. And it also helps with the uptake of the nutrients and the water. So we're having to use less water, less nutrients year round, which is really key as well. So we're going to look at introducing some water chillers as well for the summer period in particular. But just trying to do as many little things as we can to sort of get as much out of those crops.
I think a lot of times when people hear, and I'm thinking like people outside of agriculture, when you hear the word farming or farmer, you're thinking of somebody that has a plot of land that they're going out to physically work, or maybe it's, livestock that they're tending to. But your space really has been indoor farming, vertical farming, controlled environment farming. How has that perception changed for you, maybe from what you originally thought farming was compared to what maybe farming for the future is? And my second question is, do you think, just based on your experience, you've worked in a lot of different countries and spaces, do you think we're going to see a big shift toward more of that indoor vertical controlled environment agriculture in the future?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think like for me, growing up with what would probably be considered, I guess, more traditional agriculture in Australia, I've always had a deep respect and like interest and passion for that. But I also think like having worked with Sundown Pastoral, they're a very innovative farm for Australia. They've done a lot and they've always sort of been very forward thinking. So in terms of what we're doing here, I think obviously it's definitely partly regional specific, because we don't really have any other option in Dubai in terms of like the growing, unless we're talking in the winter. Otherwise we are purely reliant on importation. So we have to be as creative and forward thinking as possible. So yeah, I think one thing I have found interesting, like working more in that space, is that I think there's definitely an easier way to sort of educate and get like a involvement from the younger generation in this space, as opposed to potentially some traditional agricultural practices. And I think obviously with technology being a key part of that, kids are growing up, attached to their phone, laptop and everything nowadays. So, a huge part of our job, especially in previous role at Botanica, was really data analytics. It's a lot of like people management. It's a lot of, more technology focus, like understanding like the LED grow lights, the nutrient dosing system, the pumps, like understanding how all the technology integrates with one another, and how to sort of optimize that. So that's definitely something that differs, and I think is interesting to a lot of like the younger generation, and is far away from sort of more the traditional agriculture. But at the same time, I think it's probably understated how much, or how, I guess, much technology goes into all agriculture, and how, I guess, scientific it really is in terms of the process. So I think this is just one way of sort of allowing that connection. So I found that with like school groups, I think it is an easy way to get kids interacting with agriculture, the indoor space. So and here, yeah, it just really is like a necessary practice in order for the agricultural industry to grow here. So I think, yeah, in terms of whether we'll see whether it's indoor vertical farms like globally, I think for me, the way I see it is it's a tool, and it depends on how you want to utilize it, or for that specific region. Obviously, with the way that cities, like people are moving from more rural to urban areas, you have higher density populations. Being able to have an indoor vertical farm in and local to like a high population area, I think makes a lot of sense in certain aspects. And I think also, yeah, obviously it could be a good way to get the younger generation still involved in agriculture. Whether or not it'll be seen everywhere, I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. I don't see, and I haven't seen, indoor vertical farms that can grow things like trees or fruit crops or wheat or those sort of like large broadacre farming crops. I haven't seen that done cost effectively yet. I do know some farms that are working on it, and potentially that may change in the future. But for right now, I think it works really well for some niche crops, some staple crops, but not necessarily the full range. But then it also could be used differently in terms of like for forestry, for instance. Like they could be growing the plantlets or the seedlings indoors. Maybe that will give them a higher success rate of trees that will actually go on to the full maturity. Or for instance, I've seen like some farms here that use it for fodder, but more in like a surplus or like a as a backup, as opposed to the full volume that they would require. So yeah, there's some definite advantages there. And also if you ran like a kitchen or like had it at a school, it's a way that the kids could grow product at the school very easily, that could be used in the school canteen, or you could have chefs literally growing edible flowers or microgreens right beside the kitchen. So those sort of things I think could be they make a lot of sense. But to what degree it will go to, I guess we'll see. I never expected it to get this far this quickly, so you never know.
So as we think about that whole precipice of farming for the future, what's your kind of outlook for what the future of food production looks like from your perspective?
Probably the biggest learning for me recently is trying to sort of marry, I guess, more the traditional agricultural practices and approach with the technology that I've seen, whether it's from indoor or greenhouses, because I think we need to find a balance between, there's no real value from my perspective in growing really expensive crops that the majority of the population can't enjoy. So it's really about, the greenhouses for me offer an approach for us to be able to grow product. The goal is to do it year round, but it needs to be affordable. It needs to be available to the masses, and cost effective. So I think that's sort of the direction I'm trying to use the technology, rather than, I think you can definitely take it to extremes.